The honourable member Calgary-Midnapore.
In 2002, I accepted an invitation to join the Canadian Foreign Service. My motivation? To serve the country I loved and to promote the values of freedom, the rule of law, and democracy. My guiding document, the Vienna Convention for Diplomatic Relations, a document revered by all nations, a universally codified agreement. The statutes within it allowed the nations to conduct their diplomatic functions in a safe and mutually agreed upon manner. To operate within it meant security, fidelity, continuity of business abroad. For me, to violate it was unthinkable. To honor it meant safe care of citizens, both at home and abroad. In 2018, I was asked to serve as Shadow Minister for Democratic Institutions. My pleas to the then Minister of Democratic Institutions and now Minister of Families, Children and Social Development to protect our democracy at all costs fell on deaf ears. And I'm particularly offended that our current leader is accused of having done nothing when she held the pen leading up to the 2019 and subsequent 2021 elections. In 2018, I questioned the Prime Minister in the House, for which she responded. I asked, Mr. Speaker, in response to a question in New York this week, the Prime Minister admitted to knowing that foreign money had influenced the 2015 federal election. Bill C-76 was supposed to close the loopholes in the election legislation, but it does nothing to stop foreign money from influencing our elections. When is the Prime Minister going to take this issue seriously and stop foreign interests from influencing our elections? She replied, Mr. Speaker, I thank my colleague for her question. It is vital that everyone in the House work together to avoid and prevent foreign influence and interference in our elections. I am excited to work with everyone in the House to make sure we pass Bill C-76. In Bill C-76 are tangible measures to ensure we can prevent foreign interference. I hope my colleagues on the other side will work with us to get this legislation passed quickly to ensure that our next election is protected. In addition to the toothless Bill C-76, the then minister gloated about the creation and implementation of the Critical Election Incident Protocol, a government body composed of 5 senior civil servants who all reported to the Liberal government. Be it incompetence or intention, this Liberal minister also failed, along with the Prime Minister, to keep Canadians safe and to protect our democratic institutions. But she refused to believe otherwise. And yet here we are today. Revelations of significant interference in the 2019 and 2021 federal elections by the People's Republic of China. Reports of money being funneled to candidates and Canadians being intimidated. Canada's election law is very clear. No person who does not reside in Canada shall, during an election period, in any way induce electors to vote or refrain from voting for a particular candidate. Yet the Prime Minister continues to avoid questions and dismisses concerns as ill-informed or even racist. When questioned by the official opposition in November, he stated he was never briefed on election candidates receiving money from Beijing. This even while Global News was reporting intelligence memos were given to the PM months before outlining how Beijing's consulate directed the funneling of a large sum of money to 11 candidates in the 2019 election. When the former head of CSIS called for a public inquiry into election interference, the Prime Minister labeled that suggestion as undermining democracy. As well, after Global News alleged in late February that the member for Don Valley North was aided in 2019 by the Chinese consulate in Toronto, the Prime Minister dismissed questions about the situation, coming close to accusing media of racism for even daring to ask about it, and that those who are trying to get to the truth are damaging confidence in Canada's democratic institutions. Most recently, a report published by the Globe and Mail as of May 1st made the claim that CSIS documents from 2021 state that China sees Canada as a prime target for interference. They also state that the Member of Parliament for Wellington Halton Hills family was targeted by Chinese diplomat Zhao Wei. The diplomat faced no repercussions, and the member was not made aware until the Globe and Mail story 2 years later. This is why Conservatives, the final defenders of freedom in this nation, have presented this motion here today. I will now discuss each part in more detail. 8, create a foreign registry similar to Australia and the United States of America. We have had on this side of the House a member bring legislation to this House only to have it defeated by this government, and now we see why. In 2019, the member for Renfrew Nipissing Pembroke brought such legislation to this House, and it was voted down by this government. The irony of other nations of having implemented such registries is that in June of 2018, this government announced at the G7 Charlevoix Summit that they would lead on the commitment by G7 leaders on the protection of democracy by playing and coordinating a leadership function for the broader G7 network. Most recently, we've seen the Liberal member for Nepean refute the necessity for such a registry. Given the discoveries over the last few weeks, we can see why. B, establish a national public inquiry on the matter of foreign election interference. All parties but the government, even their coalition partners from the NDP, are calling for this clause. Yet we have learned this government will kick and scream to avoid transparency, and even when brought to pass by this House with opposition parties in agreement, will refuse to comply to provide information. C, close down the People's Republic of China-run police stations still operating in Canada. Madam Speaker, I'm sure that Canadians were in disbelief that never mind policing stations from another nation, but for a nation that has no regard for human rights or the rule of law was operating within our borders. And in fact, that the Minister of Public Safety gave us the assurance that all of these stations had been closed. And yet we found out on May 1st that these continue to operate in Quebec. Madam Speaker, Part D, expel all of the People's Republic of China's diplomats responsible for and involved in these affronts to Canadian democracy. The 1961 Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations is a cornerstone of modern international relations and international law. Madam Speaker, it states, the host nation, at any time and for any reason, can declare diplomatic staff to be persona non grata, Madam Speaker. The sending state in that case must recall this person within a reasonable period of time, or otherwise this person may lose their diplomatic immunity, something that should have happened by now, Madam Speaker. And yet, Madam Speaker, this Prime Minister and his government have failed to do so for this individual, Madam Speaker. And if the member for Wellington Halton Hills is not safe, how do we know that all members of this House and their families are not safe, Madam Speaker? The Vienna Convention is about honor, and so I thought this House. But in the words of the great author, Lord Jeffrey Archer, there is no honor among thieves. This government should honor the irreprehensible violation of diplomatic immunity and declare Zhao Wei persona non grata. Madam Speaker, as a former diplomat for Canada, my desire for freedom, democracy, and the rule of law will never be hampered, not even by this government. It is a raison d'être for my being here in the House of Commons. and it is why I stand in support of the member for Wellington-Halton Hills. The Conservative Party will never back down from those who attempt to impede the fundamental freedoms of Canadians: truth, freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. If other members believe in those as well, they will support this legislation. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Unlike the Conservative Party, this is a government that truly believes in doing what it can to combat foreign interference and intimidation. It's very interesting how the Conservatives on the other end play politics with the issue. It's important that Canadians that follow the debate today realize that CSIS is the deciding authority as to where and how things are brought up. The Prime Minister found out on Monday, Madam Speaker. The Prime Minister then followed up by saying he wants to have updates on the issue whenever MPs are brought to the attention of CSIS. The member from Wellington-Halton Hills is known for 2 years. The question is, has the member actually raised it with her, any member of the caucus? Has he brought it up inside the chamber? Has he done anything on the issue, Madam Speaker? Why has the member been more transparent?
I, again, want to remind members, especially those who have already had an opportunity to make a speech, to wait until it's questions and comments if they wish to try to be recognized for input. The Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And it's very clear that Canadians cannot have confidence in this government to protect democracy. They cannot have confidence in this government to protect our democratic institution. They cannot have confidence in this government to protect the members in this House and their families and their loved ones abroad, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we can take no lessons from this government. They had their opportunity leading up to 2019, and they failed, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Talbot. Drummond. Yes, that's right. Thank you. I'd like to thank my colleague for her speech, Madam Speaker. I think this is an excellent subject for the Conservative Opposition Day. And this is a concern of the Bloc Québécois as well. I listened to my honourable colleague's speech, and I heard her concerns, and we share them, as I said. But I also have a concern about the situation in its entirety. What does she think about the appearance of Alexandre Trudeau before the committee? I think that that family is genetically arrogant, and Madam Speaker, this is not anything. He's not just something small. He accused journalists and he accused the former CEO of the foundation of disseminating misinformation to mislead the matter, to mislead Canadians. So I'm very confused about all this. What does my colleague think? The Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore. Thank you very much to my colleague for his question. Yes, here with the official opposition, we're also very confused because we heard the news about foreign interference and about the member for Wellington-Halton Hills. So we also share what the member said. We agree with what he said. The idea that the media and journalists are spreading misinformation is shocking, and it was shocking to hear it from that witness. And so it was really unbelievable to hear that from the Prime Minister's brother. And so I agree with my colleague completely.
Member for Esquimalt-Sanet-Sud.
Madam Speaker, of course, as a New Democrat, I'm concerned about foreign election interference, and we were the first party to suggest a public inquiry. But I have two concerns here, and the member's speech raises both of them for me. One is that if we turn this into a bitter partisan issue, we're actually doing the work of the foreign agents that seek to disrupt our democracy instead of working together to solve the problem. And the second one is that if we exclusively focus on China, we will miss other attempts to interfere in our democracy, including things like the convoy, which was outside, that this member supported, where $1 million flowed from the U.S. to try and overthrow the government here.
The honourable member Calgary-Midnapore has a brief answer, please. I have a point of order. For Edmonton Centre? Winnipeg Centre, sorry.
So, you know, I'm sitting here. I know it's the end of the season, but calling people clowns across the way and stuff like that, like, there needs to be limits here. There's nobody in the House pretty much right now. We're on duty. We're in the middle of debate. And, you know, we don't have to, especially with what we're debating right now, which is actually really serious. We're talking about threats to democracy, and then we behave like this in the House. When we're talking about protecting our democracy, protecting democratic institutions, it's really troubling to me, because I actually am concerned about the state of our democracy. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member, I appreciate the feedback she has provided. I'm not sure who may have called somebody by that name. I would just remind members that we are to be respectful here, and on a number of occasions we have raised the issue that calling people names in the House of Commons is not acceptable. And so I would just ask individuals to be respectful. The honourable member for Calgary-Midnapore, a brief answer, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. You know, I simply have to refute the facts within that question. The truth of the matter is, Madam Speaker, is that that member stands in a coalition with the government that is impeding Canadians from their families, and that is giving them cover up and not keeping members and their families safe. He is complicit with that, Madam Speaker, and he should think about that. Thank you very much.